When forensic scientists look at fingerprints, they look at three different types of fingerprints: latent, patent, and plastic. A latent fingerprint is a hidden fingerprint made visible through the use of powders or other techniques. A patent fingerprint is a visible fingerprint that happens when fingers with blood, ink, or some other substance on them touch a surface and transfer the pattern of their fingerprint to that surface. Finally, a plastic fingerprint is a three-dimensional fingerprint made in soft materials such as clay, soap, or putty. Although fingerprints seem basic and inconvenient to use, they are unique such that no two people have the same fingerprint, so if reviewed correctly they can provide conclusive evidence in a case. Interestingly enough, many people are falsely led to believe that someone can change or remove their fingerprint altogether, whereas this is not the case. Contrary to popular belief, the fingerprint is not formed on the epidermal or outer layer of a fingerprint. Instead, they are formed on the basal layer or middle layer, where they have a protective shield to cover them and prevent long-lasting damage. Fingerprint identification is a very specific task as it involves many points of reference. In order to confidently identify a fingerprint to a reference print, the fingerprint must be the same type, meaning that it is a loop, whorl, or arch, and have at least 12 other points of reference, usually including a ridge count. Since fingerprints can be found and created on nearly any surface, they require many different techniques for collection since no one method is universal. While there are numerous methods of collection, only a few are listed below. First, fluorescent powder is commonly used along with UV lights to help find latent prints on multicolored or dark surface areas. The powder sticks to the oils of a fingerprint, and with the UV lights the powder glows, making it easy to photograph, document, and lift partial or full fingerprints for further investigation. Magnetic powder, like fluorescent powder, is used to reveal latent prints and works best on shiny surfaces, plastic baggies, and containers. Magnetic powder is used by pouring a black magnetic dust over fingerprints and then waving a magnetic brush around above the fingerprints to drag the dust around, allowing it to stick to the fingerprint while simultaneously picking up any excess magnetic dust so that the fingerprint is readable and ready to be lifted. Cyanoacrylate fuming method is also called the superglue method, and it is a procedure used to develop latent prints on a variety of objects, including glass cups, among other items, by using the vapors of superglue to stick to the fingerprints. After leaving the object of study in a chamber for the allotted amount of time, the forensic scientist would brush a powder of their choosing, whether it be magnetic powder, cornstarch, etc., on the fingerprint and then lift the print for further documentation and examination. The final one on the list, anhydrine, is a chemical that bonds with the amino acids in fingerprints to produce a blue or purple color. This is also used to lift fingerprints from surfaces such as paper and cardboard and those not easily seen. For our forensics physical evidence project, we chose the topic of fingerprints. And for our in-depth case study, we chose the Mayfield versus the United States of America. For the Mayfield versus the United States case, the plaintiff was Brandon Mayfield and the defendant was the United States of America. This case was a mass murder or terrorism case that occurred on March 11, 2004 at approximately 7:37 a.m. at the Atucha train station in Madrid, Spain. On March 11, 2004 at 7:37 a.m., the first of few backpack bombs went off in the Atucha train station in Madrid, Spain. By the end of the attacks, 191 were found dead, with over 1,800 wounded. The FBI found a fingerprint in a van near the crime scene which contained materials used in the bombings. The FBI incorrectly confirmed a match of the fingerprint to that of U.S. resident Brandon Mayfield, a lawyer who was then convicted. Shortly after, the Spanish government continued to examine the print and declared that there weren't enough points of reference to confirm that the print was a match to Mayfield, and that it instead belonged to an Algerian extremist and suspected mastermind behind the attacks, Daoud Owain.
September 11th will always be a day of national tragedy for the United States. In Spain today, March 11th, now has similar infamy. In Madrid this morning, more than 190 people were killed and more than 1,400 injured when 10 separate bombs ripped through commuter trains and railway platforms during rush hour. The scene was horrific, bodies and body parts everywhere. The Spanish Prime Minister called it simply mass murder. Who was responsible? It could be Spanish terrorists, it could be Islamic terrorists, it could be both. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, the attack itself, and ABC's Charles Glass in Madrid.
The blast that ripped through Madrid's early morning commuter train sent blood and metal flying. Ambulances rushed more than 1,000 wounded to city hospitals, and the government set up centers for people to identify the bodies of missing loved ones. This young woman says she was just behind one of the cars when it exploded. Everyone started running and they were covered in blood, she says. It was horrendous. And this man saw bodies scattered everywhere. He says some were burning and screaming. Dazed survivors wandered along the tracks, and police rushed to a scene of horror with trains torn to pieces and parts of human bodies in crushed train cars. The timing, when most people were on their way into work, appeared designed to cause the maximum number of civilian casualties. All the explosives went off in backpacks on the same commuter line into Madrid. 7:30 this morning, the first 3 explosions erupt inside a crowded train pulling into the central Atocha station. 7:44, 4 more bombs tear through the next train before it reaches the same station. 5 minutes later, another commuter train explodes at a suburban stop 9 miles down the line. And 7:54, at a station 6 miles from the Atocha station, the last 2 bombs explode on a double-decker commuter train. An hour later, police find 2 more bombs that did not go off and detonate them. Within hours of this morning's explosion, Spain's newspapers were on the streets with special editions. The headlines say that this is the worst terrorist massacre in Spanish history, and they're calling today our 9/11. The bombs traumatized a city that has seen nothing like it in its modern history. Volunteers offered to donate blood and to help at emergency centers. One rescue worker says they have been performing amputations and treating survivors for massive bleeding and for hysteria. The Prime Minister and King Juan Carlos addressed the nation to condemn the attacks and to promise to find the culprits. The Spanish people themselves honored their dead with a minute's silence today, and this evening thousands gathered in the city center to grieve. Charles Glass, ABC News, Madrid.
It is believed that this crime was committed by an Islamic extremist inspired by groups such as Al-Qaeda. The fingerprints found at the scene of the crime were used to solve this case. At first, the FBI matched the fingerprint to U.S. citizen Brandon Mayfield and arrested him. The Spanish government continued to examine the print from the crime scene and decided that the print actually belonged to an Algerian extremist. The FBI convicted the wrong suspect, Brandon Mayfield, by human error. They had 4 individuals check the prints, and just from 4 confirmations, they thought he was one of the few that were involved in the bombing. On October 4th of 2004, Brandon Mayfield filed a lawsuit against the government of the U.S. District Courts for unlawful arrest and imprisonment, unlawful searches, surveillance, and seizures, all in violation of the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures and requires any warrant to be judicially sanctioned and supported by a probable cause. Mayfield reached an agreement with the government and the district court approved it on November 29, 2006. The agreement included that Mayfield and his family receive $2 million and that they destroy all surveillance, files, and etc. They will also be returned all witness materials. In return, Mayfield agreed to release the government of all liability or further litigation except as one specific claim in which they violated the Fourth Amendment.